This is not necessarily bad advice. The problem, hey, you with me? The problem is that people say it in classrooms full of 11-year-olds who lack the capacity to apply it in a way that's not dogmatic. So you end up with a bunch of people who think their creative jurisdiction begins and ends with their own experiences, which is sad. I might be preaching to the choir here, but this video is partially directed at beginners. After all, if you're just getting into writing, you're going to encounter a lot of advice, and most of that advice will range from helpful to harmless. But there are a few mindsets, mantras, and practices that I consider to be pathologically unproductive. This is coming from a mix of my own experience and the observations I've accumulated while working as a script doctor. Well, maybe script chiropractor. Write what you know is dangerous because of the reason I described earlier, that it categorically stifles the imagination, but since I'm feeling transformational, I want to reframe it in a way that I believe has the complete opposite effect. Imagine, if you will, that steamboat, orangutan. You have a very painful childhood memory you'd like to write about. Mindy used to make fun of you on the playground for being poor. Skill issue, if you ask me, but you certainly didn't see it that way. She humiliated you for circumstances outside of your control, circumstances that you couldn't have possibly understood the complexity of. You became incredibly self-conscious about your family's financial status. You were afraid to invite friends over to the apartment, and you, in a tangle of childish insecurity, resented your parents for not being successful enough. That's the story you want to write, the story of you dealing with that. And you very well could. But as usual, I want to turn to a form of purpose versus personality. Just as in the last video, I talked about dividing a character up into two categories, one being that character's belief/orientation on the theme, aka their purpose, and the other being everything else, occupation, temperament, quirks, demographics, aka personality. I now want to apply this thinking to a whole story. We can separate the thematic underpinnings of a story from everything else. That means forget the setting, forget the genre, forget everybody's names, forget the vibes, just look at the skeleton. Fundamentally, the situation I described could be boiled down to feeling shame for circumstances outside of one's control and projecting that shame onto a scapegoat. That's the thematic and emotional core of this story. That's what I remember, that's what I understand, that's what I know. And I'm going to write what I know. But does it have to be playgrounds and apartments and Mindy? No, all that stuff was just personality. I could just as easily tell the exact same story at an alien battle academy on Zorlon 5, where Gleebglob is bullying me because I have a smaller bloingus than all of the other Spawn, and my arc is that I have to conquer the shame I feel about my bloingus and accept the complex circumstances that led to my situation, instead of just blaming it on Jibble, know what I mean? And that's a one-to-one example, but you could twist it even more. That same emotional process that you know intuitively, you could translate into an infinite number of circumstances. No matter how different they are from the real story, they share the same thematic core. That's writing what you know. And there's a good chance that you're already doing this, even if it's subconscious. But since a misinterpretation of it could stop you from achieving your full potential, I figured it was worth mentioning, and now I'm moving on. Next up, we have I will be brief because this topic bores me. I don't think show don't tell is necessarily bad, but once again, it's vague and prone to misinterpretation. I think a lot of people see it as a total ban on exposition, but sometimes exposition is like, fine, bro, so long as the expositing character or device would exposit given the circumstances. Subtlety is not good for its own sake. A thing I like to do is start a scene in the subtext, in the showing, and then turn the heat up until it climaxes into a big overt telling moment when appropriate.
It's cheaper.
Fun for the whole family. But I do think the war on telling is also an extension of a much deeper problem that I would call audience-centric storytelling, in which the chief motivating factor in every writing decision is how the audience responds. And you might ask, why would I consider this a problem? Well, if a particular storytelling choice is right in every way, character, plot, theme, structure, etc., but it just happens to not satisfy the audience, some would consider this a valid reason to change it. For instance, the Star Wars prequels used to get a lot of flack for the space politics, even though those big Senate chamber dialogue scenes were instrumental to the plot. Even though the language used in them accurately represented the complexity of George Lucas's world, people cited them as one of the trilogy's major flaws. Because I don't want to hear the talkie-talkie in the big room. It's boring. Yes, I know this trilogy is literally about a shifting government, and yes, I know that would be impossible to portray without depicting the actual machinations of said government, but my lizard brain is not stimulated, damn it, and therefore I declare this a flaw. So what if removing those scenes would cripple the story on every level? The audience comes first. There are multiple paradoxes at play here, and I think that they could be explained, as most things can, with an overly general bell curve meme. Stage 1 is chasing what you think the audience will respond to, pure emotional manipulation. Applaud at this moment, cry at this moment, like a psychological cocktail of audience engagement. And then stage 2 is sacrificing the audience in the name of internal consistency and structure. But stage 3 is when you realize that the internal consistency was not the point, but was in fact a means to an end. That end ironically being audience engagement. Hi, does math make you Well, then you gotta check out the sponsor of today's video, Brilliant.org. As right-brained, flowchart-loving, infographic-oriented people, analytical skills don't always come easy to us. I'm making assumptions, but you are watching a creative writing video. I think I know how to do probabilities, but it's been a while, so I'm afraid to quiz myself. At least I would be if I didn't have Brilliant. The basic math skills I need to do my own accounting and secretary work as a YouTuber are right here, presented in a way that's effective specifically for busy people and visual learners like me. And the thing that always scared me the most about learning technical skills was memorization. I loved my high school math teachers, but there's a reason that they were math teachers. Communication consisted of rattling off formulas and tables and hoping students retained it all. Brilliant, on the other hand, is like math being taught to you by me. It's like if I were teaching math. On top of that, the platform is built around interactivity, so instead of just watching a lecture, you participate. For a 30-day free trial of Brilliant, go to brilliant.org/local or click the link in my description. The first 20 people to do this will get 20% off a premium subscription. Do it now. I like to feel something when I'm watching a movie, but to really get the tears out of me, the movie has to make me believe that my feelings were incidental. And the only way that's possible is by creating an airtight story that's busy handling itself and not worrying about me. Yeah. Of course, this is all a bit tedious because there's no way for me to know the creative process behind the thing I'm watching. Who am I to say what the more effective process is? All I see is the product, right? Unless, of course, I was there during development. Unless, of course, I workshopped a different story with a different writer every day for a month and slowly began to spot patterns. Look, I'm not saying you shouldn't find your own way to it, but in my experience, any writing advice that has to do with making the audience care, making the audience sad, and making the audience hate your villain won't bridge the gaps in your story. It'll just create new gaps, because you'll have characters acting in ways they wouldn't purely for supposed entertainment value. You'll have the canon of your world being misrepresented on account of scenes you omitted for lizard brain purposes. Oh, hi, James Gunn. Yeah, apparently Rocket saved the High Evolutionary and locked him up in a cell, but since that scene was cut, it just looks like he decided not to shoot him and then left him to die on an exploding ship. It's a bit annoying. Personally, I'd urge you to focus on getting the right story, and that sometimes means whipping out the infamous "that's just your opinion" defense. If you're talking to a critique partner and they say, your protagonist is really unlikable, and you ask, well, what do you mean? And they say, well, I'm having a hard time rooting for them. You're very obviously being given a purely emotional note, which is a subset of metacritique, which basically means the real world is seeping into your story and corrupting it with agendas. In this case, the agenda is making the audience root for the character. If you're letting the real world guide the choices you make, you're doing a meta. And although I prefer not to think in this way, as evidenced by my use of the term corrupting, you're welcome to. I'm just encouraging you to distinguish in-universe criticism from meta-criticism. Imagine if that same critique partner said your protagonist was unlikable, but when you asked them to clarify, they responded, oh, well, all of the other characters enjoy spending time with your protagonist even though he's outwardly hateful and violent towards them. You see how that's a completely different type of criticism? Did you notice how without clarification both appeared to be saying the same thing? This is a common communication breakdown that occurs between critique partners, and also sometimes within the mind of one singular writer. The line gets blurry for some people, and it's very easy to pick them out. Their least favorite character is usually the character who does reprehensible things within the narrative, whereas a writer who understands the difference between meta-criticism and in-universe criticism will ask you to clarify. Do you mean the character I would like the least if they were a person, or the character I believe is the most poorly written? I'd also like to add that pacing and tone are examples of this conflation manifesting in language. They're dimensions of the subjective experience that we've given labels, but at the end of the day, they don't belong in the same category as character motivations and internal consistency. Because if the words didn't give everybody flashbacks, I would start every critique session off by asking, are you looking for subjective critique or objective critique? I don't think one is inherently more valuable than the other, mind you, but I do prefer objective because it's measurable. In an objective critique session, we can talk about a character's motivations in the same way that we would talk about a busted water pipe. Every single one of my videos stems from this mindset, but I didn't want to reiterate it for the millionth time. I actually wanted to step outside of it for a moment to address its potential shortcomings. The fact of the matter is, when you go to see a movie in the theater, it's going to be about 2 hours long. And I think the issue of runtime is the single biggest problem I encounter in my own writing style, because I just go from meaningful character beat to meaningful character beat without any padding in between, without checking in on the character between developments. And when I try to put things in between, I literally don't know how, because I've already established the character's motivations at the beginning, and they don't get the revelation until the halfway point, but for some reason there's only 2 things slated to happen in between those moments, and looks like I accidentally wrote a short film again. Lovely. It's weird hearing me talk like this, isn't it? And I'm at this very point in the feature I'm writing, especially since I've built a high-octane plot that doesn't really lend itself to slowing down and vibing. Bottom line, my advice isn't everything. You're probably going to need a healthy combination of subjective and objective thought to get your product where you want it to be in terms of deliverables. In management theory, there is a type of person who's referred to as a trained novice. Basically a person who has been introduced to the existing mindset, but has not been around long enough to develop an adherence to that mindset. Someone who has all the tools, but not enough field experience to begin anticipating which one they'll need. For the trained novice, tools are chosen on a situation-to-situation basis. There's no favorite tool yet. And I'm at the point where I definitely have a favorite tool. What are all the perspectives one could have on cheating a cast of characters? Someone who has ethical perspective. I like to take all the possible perspectives one could have on the situation to boil each opinion down to a single character. My writing during the era when I was first creating my method was, dare I say it, impeccable. But now it's hard to think outside of my method. In the same way that I can walk onto a client's 5-year ongoing project and revitalize it by saying, figure out why character does thing, a collaborator could just as easily save my work by going, what if you did a silly little montage there? Which is all to say, try to think outside of your own process, and if you can't, bring in someone who already does. So long as you're both open-minded, you can learn a lot from each other. Certainty is the enemy of progress. That's all the video I got for today. I'll be back in 3 weeks for the world building video. It's a big one. You'll get to watch me and my friend Jay construct a D&D world in real time with asides pertaining to the storytelling theory we're implementing. I don't think I've ever been this excited for a video. It's super unique. We cannot wait to share it with you. You'll notice I changed my handle ever so slightly to be my quote-unquote full name. I knew from the start that I didn't want to use my real identity just for practical purposes, filtering out unwanted attention, marketing, and so on. Local was originally Local Scriptman back in the prehistoric days, and then I shortened it to Local because I thought it was snappier, which it was. But a consequence of that was people starting to use it like it was my name, which I don't blame them for, obviously. Like, what the hell else would they call me? It's just that I've never been particularly comfortable operating through personas. Like, I didn't grow up with online friends. That world is very new to me. My brain isn't hardwired for it. So when I'm having a conversation online and I find myself sharing any personal detail whatsoever, but I'm still operating under a fake identity, I get this really gross feeling of dissonance. And lately I've just been shedding the local persona the moment I get into a one-on-one conversation. Like, hey, you can just call me Lucas. And I don't want it to seem like I'm making a blanket statement about the adverse mental health effects of hiding behind a little cartoon character, but personally, I'm just not comfortable getting fully absorbed into the online parasocial lifestyle, if that's an accurate way to describe it. I can be partially in it. I think that's unavoidable when you have a big platform, but just not fully in it. Like I said, the original choice to not use my real identity was for very real practical concerns, and those still exist, but social anxiety wasn't a part of the equation, and now the parasocial thing is literally giving me social anxiety of the sort I haven't felt since I was an actual child. And I'm still unpacking my feelings, and I'm still not sure how I want to handle it, but this move was essentially just me subconsciously making it 10% more difficult to think of Local as my name. And it might be the first of several micro adjustments I make to create the boundaries I want. But yeah, thanks for sticking around. Something Patreon, something notification bell. Remember to water your plants, unless they're succulents. In that case, chill. Seriously, you're drowning them. Oh my God. And I'll see you next time.
Got more problems for a troubled
earthquake.
singer. Yep,
We're having an earthquake.